Welcome back to the Reidel Law Firm Library and Odyssey channel. Today I have some commentary. I know it's been a while since I've given some commentary, but I saw a news article this past week or so, breaking some news about the U.S. and their decision to go with sanctions in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. So stay tuned for that. I'm going to chat about it. I handle international trade law, sanctions compliance, import-export compliance. I also do franchise law. If you need help with any of that, give me a call. Would love to talk to you, hear about what your challenges are, and see if I can help you. So let's jump right into it. So this is an article from Zero Hedge via antiwar.com. There's a author there, Kyle Anzalone. So the title is U.S. believed economic nuclear weapon would end Russian war in Ukraine. So the article details, and the sources are from Bloomberg and where else? Trying to remember. From the Cato Institute. There's some other citations later in the article. But this is from reputable sources, right? This is from people that are in D.C. close enough to know what's happening. And the point of this article that they're making is that the White House, the national security team, I guess, and the people advising the current administration were trying to come up with a game plan for how to deter, how to end, how to contain the war between Russia and Ukraine currently. And early on in the conflict, their decision-making process settled upon this idea of what was quoted from National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, quote, an economic equivalent of a nuclear weapon, and basically use that against Russia to have them stop and end the war in Ukraine. So what's interesting about this, and coming from a sanctions world, is that the U.S., in general, the United States and the West, we have this kind of collective fantasy that sanctions work and that sanctions achieve the goals that they're set out to achieve. And historically, the answer is they resoundingly do not. They never do. Basically, almost never do. I would point to Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, North Korea. You can go on the list. Libya to some extent, and Somalia. And sanctions have never caused regime change. They have never caused democracy, whatever you define that to be, to spontaneously erupt in a country that we have sanctioned. Never happened, never will, because it's a fantasy. It's this ideological thing this belief, I guess, ideological belief that we can impose economic sanctions and in doing so impose our will on other countries without having to commit to violence, basically, to threats and of war and actual war. And it doesn't work. I know it's kind of a go-to for lack of a better word, chicken hawks, right? People who, those in think tanks and in D.C. who would rather, who don't want to send troops maybe or are reluctant to, but they're still willing to push the precipice of foreign policy to conflict through sanctions and economic weapons, right? So it doesn't work. It never has. It never will. It's a fantasy. And our thinking is stuck in this mercantilist, 18th century mindset that we can impose our will economically on other people. So anyways, this article details it, and the administration, quote, believed that economic war inflicted shock and awe on the Russian economy, and that some officials even countered that it would cause too much damage to the Russian economy, that we shouldn't do it. And frankly, it didn't happen. I mean, there was double-digit GDP contraction predictions and estimates. Didn't happen. I think it dropped 1%, maybe 2%, whatever, from what we understand. This year it looks like they're projected to grow, right, the Russian economy. So they've had years to prepare for this. and they're not stupid, right? They see what the United States does economically and how our sanctions. I mean, they've seen it with Iran, Syria, Cuba, Venezuela, and they know how to adjust. They know how to work. And besides that, our sanctions are not a unified front. Frankly, most of the world doesn't sanction Russia. They don't care. Anyone outside of the EU and North America and Australia, I guess, and Japan, they don't have an interest in sanctioning or dealing with Russia, right, and creating some type of an economic weapon to use against them. So it's not a unified front. It's not working. It's not going to work, right? Now, I'm not saying that there hasn't been any damage. There has been damage. We can quantify that. We see it to their economy, to their industrial base, to their consumer base, to their population. Certainly there are damages, but it's nowhere near the economic equivalent of a nuclear bomb. It's just total nonsense to think that. So anyways, that was the thinking last year, 2022, when this all started, that they have, that was the mindset that they had, that they could just crush Russia with economic sanctions. Total fantasy. And the article points out that they're coming to the realization that that is a fantasy. Quotes a Cornell professor who specializes in sanctions, states that the administration has changed their strategy. Quote, they've given up the expectation that this will change Russian decision making. Instead, they now see this as an economic war of attrition. Again, it's nonsense. It's not going to happen. Even if it was an economic war of attrition, Cuba is still communist. They've had sanctions since the late 50s, early 60s. It's not going to cause regime change. It won't. Just a prime perfect example, right, of sanctions in the long term. So anyways, then there's just some details about sanctions and the UN and whatnot, but and then some kind of contrarian arguments excuse me, against sanctions. And it's interesting. So anyways, my point is, look, I handle sanctions. I deal with them. I get why they're used. And they can be an important tool in a country's toolbox, right, to control certain types of technologies, to prevent the financing or the like an economic industrial base of certain groups or countries to some extent, but they will not force a country to give up their ideology, right, or to change their regime or change their administration. That's not the way it works. But if it helps us to prevent certain goods or certain technologies from reaching the bad guys, right, so to speak, to reaching certain people, then that's what it's used for, and that's what it should be used for. But it should not be used as an economic nuclear bomb, right? It's just so silly. I mean, it's just nonsense. Anyways, so that's my commentary. I know this is getting a little on the long side, but wanted to share my thoughts because I find this interesting that the experts are just dumbfounded that their economic nuclear bomb didn't work. It's like, didn't work in Cuba, didn't work in Venezuela, didn't work in Syria, it didn't work in Libya, didn't work in Iraq, but maybe it'll work this time, right? Anyways, hey, so reach out to me if I can be of assistance to you. I handle sanctions and import and export compliance, along with franchise law, represent folks all over the world. Give me a ring, see if I can help you. Would love to learn about your challenges and see where maybe I can be of assistance. Have a good one, and we'll see you next time.